The vast majority of people who do not ever generate any value, that never generate lasting value, lasting wealth. Wealth is to be defined as it's beyond what you need for a decent life. That's what I consider to be wealth. What you need beyond paying your bills, beyond your food, your home, beyond going out every now and then to dinner. Wealth is what you don't need to live a good life. Now, there's an interesting history about the human species, the human race, when it comes to wealth accumulation. You see, for thousands of years, traders, the human race was not an accumulator. All right? That the human race largely were nomads. They traveled from location to location, right? Looking for food. Not looking for anything else but survival. All right? They packed up, moved to this location when they felt that food was better to be found in this location. And when that location dried up, the whole entire clan picked up all of their possessions and moved to another location to determine where food is more readily available. All right. Now, this is very interesting to understand. This is not the state at which human beings started to focus on accumulating anything. The idea was to accumulate nothing. The idea was to be light, to be able to travel, and to be able to move from one location to the other at the drop of a hat. When scarcity became less and less, and food became more readily, and the need to move from one location to the other started to wane, people started to stand still in the same area, raise their families without moving too frequently. And when scarcity became less, people began to have a little bit more than they needed. They didn't necessarily go hungry from week to week, and so they began to store what they did not need for today. They began to have a little bit of extra. This storing of food that I don't need today, all right, was the beginning of the accumulation of wealth. And so at this particular turn in human history, the people who had bigger stores were considered to be more important, wealthier, more capable. Their families were safer because if a drought ever occurred in food, they were fine because they had stored up enough of reserves to survive the temporary shortage. This standing still and storing, staying in the same place, built property rights, which we're going to talk about. So instead of moving as nomads from cave to cave and forest to forest and land to land, people became more stationary. You understand? And this more stationary lifestyle caused people to sort of say, well, okay, this is my piece of land. This is where I'm going to settle right here. Property rights. This is my right to have this area is mine. And then because scarcity began to wane, people began to have more than they needed, which caused the need to store and to begin to accumulate. Now, the people who stored the best were considered wealthier. The people who never stored would wind up working for those who did store so that they could survive. Now, do you see how important becoming a storer is? I mean, history tells us that the storers actually will get to a place where they support the non-storers. The wealthy support the non-wealthy. It's all about storing. Now, what's interesting in this history as well is that as certain people who were able to generate more than they needed and to begin to store, these people began to need protection from some of those who did not store, because those who did not store would sometimes see someone who did store and want to take what was stored by that family or that person. And so the storers began to need protection. This is what began to bring about governments. Governments came into existence because of wealth accumulation. There were no governments. So a group of families would get together and say, John, you are in charge of protecting the region for us. We'll take care of your family. We'll take care of everything you need. You don't have to work. Your job now is just to protect the region for us. Government selected official to protect the region. Governments came into existence to protect the wealth of accumulators. That's their only purpose. So many people feel that so many people believe that the government's purpose is to help those who don't have. Wrong. You do not know the history of how governments came into existence then if you think governments were designed to help the poor. No, governments came into existence. Elected officials came into existence to protect the accumulators, to protect the wealthy. And if you do not make the moves to transfer, to switch, to convert yourself from being a liver to an accumulator, from being a survivor to a collector of property, a collector of certain rights, a collector of certain assets that don't go to zero. If you don't make the moves to do that, you will forever be in the cold, because no matter what the marketing is, governments came into existence to protect the wealthy, and it will never change. Ever, ever. Do you understand? Ever. Now, some people say, well, Oliver, how can you say that? Because governments do give money to the poor. Well, it's not a common thing. Some of your more developed nations give it to the poor, give certain things to the poor, but why? Just to keep the peace. The lion's share always goes to the wealthy. What happened during the calamity of last year? The wealth gap greatly increased, right? The wealthy got tremendously wealthier. It was the biggest year of their lives. 2020 was the biggest year of my 40 years in the market. I'm not the only one. Amazon had the biggest year. Many of your billionaires increased their wealth by 30%. The best years of their careers as well. But what happened to those who are not accumulators? What happens to those who did not have the assets that benefited from what was going on last year, but instead had the assets that go to zero over time? Their plight got worse. This will never change when you understand the history of money, and you understand the history of governments, and you understand the history of accumulation. You become almost crazy about the need to switch yourself from being a liver and a survivor from day to day to an accumulator of the correct assets that will give you the right rights and will put you in the right place to benefit from things like last year, instead of be on the hurting side. All right, guys. So very, very important. History is God in a way. so very important. If you don't know where you've been, right, how can you possibly know where you're going, right? Okay, let's get started. I hope I made myself clear. If you have any questions whatsoever, just jot them below. I will try to answer every single one. If you like this brief little talk on a tiny little subject, which I plan to do more frequently here, please hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe by clicking the bell in the upper left-hand corner. And once again, leave a comment. Let's help the algorithm. Let's help this message get out to as many people as possible. So next time, traders, trade well. Ciao for now. Boom.